What up, ladies and gentlemen? It's your man 50 Grand, Scott Stockton, back with another review. Today we're talking about this guy right here, the Tamron 35 f1.4 lens for Canon, and I've got it adapted. So we're gonna dive into that, but first we gotta get the ambiance right. See what we burned in today. It gotta smell good in the room. Little marshmallow fireside. Let's go. All right, before I get into kind of the review of this lens, and this isn't going to be so much me comparing this to other 35s and things like that. I just want to review this lens. I've used tons of 35s, and by, almost every respect, I think every lens brand has a great 35. Sony's got the G Master 35 1.4. I've used that before. Obviously, I'm using this guy from Tamron. I've used Sigma Arts 35 1.4. The original was a bit shit, but the DGDN was better and actually finally came weather sealed. And obviously Canon, Nikon, and everybody else makes a fairly good 35. This, out of all the ones I've used, is my favorite. And maybe just by tiny margins, but we'll jump into that. But first, 35 millimeter as a focal length. Why it's important. I think that when people get cameras for the first time, they're either going to get themselves a 50 or a 35 to start out with. And the reason I think that the 35 is the best purchase out of those two, or out of any prime lenses when you first jump into cameras, is because I just think it's the most versatile lens that you can have, a 35 prime. It's wide enough to take in scenes and do landscape, but it can also be tight enough, especially if you're shooting at 1.4, 1.8, or f2. If you get closer to somebody and you get that good fall off from the bokeh, you can take amazing portraits, amazing coverage photos if you're doing events and weddings and things like that. And you'll hear me say this, and maybe it won't make sense to some, but it will to others. I just think it's a great storytelling lens. I think it's the best, maybe kind of street photography lens as soon as you jump out into the game. Shooting weddings, and I'm going to be showing you guys examples throughout this video of this guy. I just think it's the perfect focal length. And at 1.4, if you can get a 35 that has, a low f-stop, it's just the perfect focal length for me to capture things and to tell a story, like in a getting ready room when the bride's getting her hair and makeup on, and you can see mom in the background, with the Kleenex up to her eyes. I just think it's the most versatile of prime lenses, and it's near and dear to my heart. But we're not here to listen to me write a love song about the 35 millimeter focal length. We're here to jump into this review, so let's go. All right, let's dive right in. Now, you might ask, why am I reviewing a lens that's over 3 years old? And I'll tell you why. Because I use this on my Canon mirrorless cameras. I shoot with the Canon R5 and the Canon R6 Mark II. And I wanted to give a review about how a lens like this, third party, has to be adapted to go on the mirrorless bodies. I want to do a review on just how good these guys are adapted. So that's what this review is going to be about. Of course, I think we should start with talking about price a little bit. This guy's going to set you back $699. It's the cheapest of all the other manufacturers' 35s. If you look at them just as a 35 without any adapters, it's the cheapest. The next up would be Sigma's DGDN 1.4 at $749, but then it gets a little nutty. The Sony G Master's $1398, Nikon's 35 1.4 is $1696, and Canon's EF 35 1.4 is $1999, $2,000. So of all the 35s, you're going to get the best deal here, and the quality, I would say, rivals, if not better, than the other 35s. Now, if we're talking about mirrorless for Canon, you do have another option. You can get the Canon RF 35 1.8, which also has some macro capabilities. This is cheaper than all the 1.4s. It comes in at $499, but again, it's a 1.8, and also it is very plasticky. So I don't get a sense of confidence when I'm holding that lens and touching it on how well or the wear and tear is going to last. and how well it's going to do for you. But I like the 35 at 1.4, so we're just going to scrap the 35 RF 1.8, and we're just going to be talking about 1.4s in this sense. Okay, straight out the gate, let's talk about the speed of autofocus. I've had this lens before for Nikon when I shot with D750s, and it straight to the camera body with no adapter was super fast. I thought it was just as fast as the native glass. So it then became a test for me to see just how fast this was using this adapter. And on a wedding day, when we know it's crunch time during ceremonies, first looks, first kisses, tosses of what kind, you know, bouquet and whatnot, you have to have something that you're going to feel like is reliable. And I've used this on every wedding that I've shot so far with Canon. When I made the switch and went mirrorless, I've shot it on every wedding. It's always been adapted, and I can't tell that I've missed any shots. When I'm going back and I'm culling photos from different weddings, the only thing I'm doing if I'm spraying a bunch of shots in a crucial moment like first kisses and things like that, I'm just picking from the photos of, you know, which one I had better composed and things like that. It always nails focus. It feels lightning fast to me to acquire focus, which I think is probably the most important thing. You want to have a quick, you want to have a lens that's going to focus quickly. Now, granted, it is mirrorless, so we got high focusing speeds there already. But it focuses amazingly. This adapter works perfectly when paired with the R6 Mark II, the R6, the R5, the R3, any of the Canon mirrorless bodies. So I have no issue with the speed there. I have no issue with sharpness. Let's talk about sharpness. This lens is extremely sharp. While I'm talking here, I'll post up some photos and that I've shot over the past year at weddings, and, you know, zoom in and take peeks at and show you just how sharp this guy is. All right, so let's jump into the build quality of this bad boy. I think that that's very important. I talked about the Sigma 35 DG Art lens and how when I had that, I was a little disappointed in the weather sealing. It didn't have a rubber gasket, and I used to always get like rattles in the lens. I had a bunch of other people that would get rattles in that lens, and they would have to like open the back, like take some of the screws off here, pull this thing out and tighten it up just to get rid of it, which to me is a humongous pain in the ass, and I think everybody would tell you that that's a huge pain in the ass. I don't get that here. We have the rubber gasket. It is definitely weather sealed and moisture resistant. The body, it just feels like it's constructed very well. For your manual focus ring, you get this big, beautiful rubber gasket here to twist around and turn, and that's a beautiful thing. You also have your manual focus and autofocus switch right here, and it feels real good. And, you know, that's not some kind of scientific, if you came here for scientific experiments and results on the build quality here, you're not going to get it. You're just going to get a real world assessment of the build quality of me taking this on 36 weddings this year and shooting it in all kinds of weather. Shooting it in the desert in Vegas, sand and wind blowing around, shooting it in rain, shooting it in snow, shooting at the beach, indoor, outdoor, humid areas. The lens is just built amazingly. I have no issues there. Yeah, fabulous lens. Now, when we're talking about the sharpness with this lens, even wide open at 1.4, obviously the center is going to be very sharp, but I've found even at the edges, you're still keeping that sharpness. Vignetting with the lens, not really an issue when you can do corrections in post and get rid of things. I think that if you're shooting 35, 1.4 wide open, you're going to see some vignetting in the corners just naturally in the raw file. But again, you can fix it in post, but that vignetting goes away as soon as you start stopping to higher f-stop numbers. Okay, really quick, I do want to talk about coatings on the lens. Somebody gave me a nice firm bollocking in the last lens review I did because I memorized the coatings that were on the front glass element. Here we have, it has two coatings. We got a fluoride coating, which is going to help you with dust, smudges, fingerprints, and any kind of dirt and things like that getting on the front of the lens. It must be doing a good job, because anytime I look at it, I'm not seeing a bunch of shit on it. So kudos for that coating. This isn't normally something I go over, as I truly just care about the functional aspects of a lens and me using it in the field and how well it does. That's typically how I grade these things. But because we're here, I'll go over them. Now, another coating we get is their B-Bar G2 coating, which is going to help you with ghosting and flare. Honestly, I'm just mentioning these things because someone gave me shit about the last lens review I did. I don't notice any issues when I'm using this lens. So, I mean, it could have no coating, 10 coatings, car wax coatings. It doesn't matter to me. The lens is perfectly built and performs amazingly. Ooh, on to something I really love talking about. This lens has 1 million glass elements on the inside. Okay, I'm bullshitting. I don't know how. Actually, I believe it's 14 elements on the inside. I don't really care about that. I don't think anybody really cares about what kind of supersonic, subsonic, Sonic the Hedgehog motor you got on the inside of this thing. Like, nobody really cares. Like, it really just comes down to image quality and how the thing performs speed-wise when in the field. There's some nerds out there that love that type of shit, but it's not me and not any of the photographers I hang around with. Something I really like about this lens is it has a minimum focus distance of 30 centimeters. So at 1.4, and being able to get that close, I love this thing for wedding details. Like if you punch in, like you can make pretty close to macro photos with this bad boy right here. A lot of times, like if I'm on the camera, I'll put it into crop sensor mode and maybe just get a little bit more reach. But at 30 centimeters with a 35-1.4, you can do some really cool product photography photos, and for weddings, you know, your wedding details. As far as chromatic aberration goes, I've noticed that I don't even correct for that really in post at all, because it handles chromatic aberration perfectly, even with backlit subjects, high contrast, low contrast items. I haven't noticed any glaring issues with chromatic aberration. So yeah, I mean, if that says one thing, like I typically in post, I would always just hit that checkbox down at the bottom in Lightroom just to correct for that. But I don't really have to do that with any of the images coming from this thing, because I don't see any of those issues. And so maybe this comes back to some of those coatings that I was just talking crap about, that maybe that's what they're doing and helping me out there. But I don't see any issues with chromatic aberration, which is great for such a fast prime. One more thing I just wanted to touch on really quick with the autofocus. While I said it was blazing quick for the things that I need and do, it's probably not going to be a lens that you're shooting sports with. I can't imagine anybody would be shooting sports with a 35-1.4 unless you were trying to take in like the whole scene or something like that. But for everything outside of sports, the autofocus speed, even when adapted, is right on par with native lenses. So I use this, as I've said 1,000,000 times, primarily for my weddings, and with face and eye detect on the Canon R bodies, it does flawlessly. So when I have people coming to me, coming away from me, sitting in chairs, being stationary, any situation with the autofocus in these Canon bodies paired with this lens, I haven't had any issues. Like, I know it sounds like I'm sitting here painting this out to be like the most perfect lens. And if it was shit at something, especially for photos, I would tell you, because that's how I earn my living. But I just haven't encountered it. One area I can talk to you about as a downside for this lens would be in video. And that would be in cases if you're recording and you don't have mics plugged in to somebody, whether they be wireless lavs or shotguns, you are going to hear it is very noticeable, the autofocus noise. So if I was doing this without this shotgun mic and I had the 35 on here, I feel like the body would be picking up some of the autofocus noise. So that's the only downside really for me. Everything else with this lens has been amazing for me. I'm going to leave us with a bunch of photos, maybe a little pixel peep in here, can dive in close on some photos and show some sharpness and things like that. Along with some music and some videos of me shooting with this bad boy. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. I've been reviewing a lot of Tamron lenses lately, and it's just because they're kicking ass at what they do. This bad boy here, I know my favorite wedding lens is the Tamron 35-150 for Sony. But if you're not using Tamron, man, y'all look into them. I know a lot of people rave about native glass and the 1.2s and things like that, but man, Tamron's really cooking with grease with their lenses. So check them out, and now let's roll into this carousel and some sample images. Thanks for tuning in. Peace. We're going to smile, just a light smile at them. I'm going to have you raise your chin up just about, there you go, beautiful. We're going to smile at each other.
Light smile this side.
We get him smiling now. What they say, smize when you smile with your eyes.
But he's got a good smize.
He's got a good smile?
Yeah, he's got the good.
It's decent.
Keep your feet going. I like little details like your toenail color. Like some of these photos.